Welcome to the Bar Exam Toolbox Podcast. Today we are talking about smart ways to study for the bar exam if you are a kinesthetic learner. Your Bar Exam Toolbox hosts are Allison Monahan and Lee Burgess. That's me. We're here to demystify the bar exam experience so you can study effectively, stay sane, and hopefully pass and move on with your life. We're the co-creators of the Law School Toolbox, the Bar Exam Toolbox, and the career-related website Career Dicta. Allison also runs the Girls Guide to Law School. If you enjoy the show, please leave a review on your favorite listening app and check out our sister podcast, the Law School Toolbox Podcast. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to us. You can reach us via the contact form on barexamtoolbox.com, and we'd love to hear from you. And with that, let's get started.
Welcome back. Today, we're talking about how kinesthetic learners can prepare for the bar exam. And I think it's fair to say this is probably the least likely learning style to be found among lawyers and law students. What do you think?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, this is a pretty unique one. I think when people learn about kinesthetic learners or the kinesthetic learning style, they're like, that sounds different than...
Right, like, oh, there are people who like really are good at physical things. Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah. So a kinesthetic learner is somebody that their brain processes material best by carrying out a physical activity. So this is someone who needs to be like a hands-on learner or a doer to be able to retain information. So if this sounds like you, you might find it hard to sit still for long periods of time. And you may zone out in the classroom when you're just trying to like follow along in a lecture. Although I think you don't have to be a kinesthetic learner to zone out in a lecture, but
definitely not. Certainly not when preparing for the bar exam.
No. Exercising is often more relaxing to you than reading a book. You are more likely to remember how you felt during an event than specific details about the event because you're kind of in your body and you're kind of connected to the feelings inside your body. You might use a lot of hand gestures during conversations with others. I like to use hand gestures when I record a podcast, even though I'm in my office by myself. Nobody here to watch me, staring at a wall in my plant.
Well, it makes the point. No one's all one way or the other, and these are all different strategies we all can use.
And, it's possible that you're the type of person who'd rather figure something out on your own than read explanations or ask for directions. So think a lot more people than just kinesthetic learners will often do that, but that's another thing to think about. So if some of these sound familiar to you, you might have the inkling of being a kinesthetic learner. And that could have made law school a little bit tough because the law school environment really caters to visual and auditory learning, mostly auditory because so much of law school is listening to lectures. So if you felt like your head was going to explode in class and you got better grades or learned more in classes with a practical component such as clinics, moot court, mock trial, then you are likely on the scale of the side of the kinesthetic learner.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, when we're talking earlier about, well, you get bored in class. Of course, everyone gets bored in class sometimes.
Right.
But I think, we're talking about a question of scale.
Yep.
If for you to sit through a 30-minute lecture made you feel like you're going to crawl out of your skin, that's different than someone who gets bored after 2 or 3 hours of con law.
Yeah.
So... and I think the bar prep process is really targeted more toward these visual and auditory learning styles. So you may need to do some things differently if you're going to be able to pass the bar.
Yeah. So, one of the things that we've talked about in all of our podcasts about learning styles is that you have to be flexible to pull in these different learning styles when they're appropriate, because you might be a visual learner for one subject, but maybe for another subject, you're a bit more auditory. And you might learn a certain area of law better, by flowcharts or things like that, but maybe, doing something with the material, being a little more kinesthetic is going to make other material sing to you. So you got to keep your mind open. Be open to all the just different possibilities because you've got to constantly be evaluating what's working for you.
Yeah, absolutely. And you've got to keep that end goal in mind. And the end goal is that you have to sit down and write an essay answer or answer multiple choice questions on a piece of paper.
Yeah.
So, that may not be a task that lends itself most naturally to kinesthetic learning. Say, for example, you want to learn to snowboard. Okay, great. You've got to use some like bodily techniques to do that. But, if you are going to have to pass the bar exam, you may need to be using ideas that are not so natural to you. But again, if you've gotten through law school, presumably you've figured out what generally works for you to get through your law school exams.
I think one thing to really evaluate is if you're someone who is looking back at their law school career and that first year was really problematic for you. So let's say you struggled academically your first year and then things got a little bit better after that because you took more seminar classes, you did more experiential learning, and then you realized that, when I think back to that first year, I didn't really know how to learn the law effectively. You want to try and brainstorm whether or not you needed to use different techniques to memorize the material and make it speak to you. Because I think one of the things that's hard about law school is you get further and further away from those core classes, which are what are actually tested on the bar. It can be easy to forget like what was a struggle for you.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. You may have done pretty well your second and third year when you had a more flexible curriculum. You could take clinics, you could do externships, you could do drafting workshops, paper classes, all these things where you could shine. Moot court, mock trial, things like that, where, you might have done really well. People are like, oh, you're so amazing. You're really just in the role of the lawyer and you seem like a lawyer, and that's fantastic, but you still have to get through the bar.
Yeah. Exactly. And so that's one of the things that you want to spend some time thinking about. So if let's say you're a 3L and you're listening to this, take some time and go back in your brain, deep in there to reminisce about what happened first year. And then try and apply some of the lessons maybe you've learned later in law school about what's worked for you to learning the volume of information that you had to that first year, because that's going to be a lot more along the lines of what the bar experience is going to feel like.
Yeah, exactly. And I think you're going to find yourself back in that familiar scenario of like, you're supposed to watch 20 hours a week of lectures and thinking, oh, I'm going crazy. Is this really the best use of my time? Am I getting anything out of this? And I think those are very valid questions that you don't have to do that if it's not going to work for you. No one cares how you studied for the bar as long as you pass the bar. So if you do find, sitting through 4 or 5 hours of lecture just isn't working, maybe there are other things that you can do.
Right. So why don't we dive into some of those other things that you can do. So Allison, what are some of the options that kinesthetic learners have?
Well, I think a lot of this, evolves around thinking about ways to use your body, whether it's through memorizing things through hand gestures, imagining writing the elements of a tort over and over again, or actually physically writing them on the piece of paper. But you've got to also get to that point, and I think that's sometimes where this falls apart is people get overwhelmed by the volume of information and they can't really process like what they actually need to learn. And so as a result, you don't end up with a very condensed set of information that's your must-know information. You're trying to learn everything. So I'd say before anyone dives into, these sort of a little bit more esoteric approaches that might be great for kinesthetic learners, you've got to get the information down to something you can actually memorize.
Yeah. And I think that's pretty much true for any bar studiers, but
absolutely.
I think for kinesthetic learners, it is a real challenge. And, you're not going to be able to learn everything. You've got to just learn enough.
Right. So exactly. So, this is a definite challenge for everyone, but if you haven't purchased your bar course yet, it may be something worth thinking about. Are these lectures going to be effective for you? If not, maybe you don't want to pay for them. Maybe you want to pay for something else that's going to more actively engage you. Totally up to you, but just something to consider is, you don't have to do what everyone else is doing if your brain isn't really working exactly the same way everyone else's is.
Yeah, exactly. So what do you think are some of the kind of actual techniques that people should weave into their study plan if they are a kinesthetic learner?
Well, I think a lot of this is thinking about ways you can engage in some type of physical activity as you study. It could be you listen to your outline that you've recorded or look at flashcards while you walk around a track or something. I I probably wouldn't have people walk down the sidewalk.
No, maybe a treadmill. Like, treadmills might be safer.
Treadmill, yeah, a treadmill, or like, an enclosed track where you're not going to run into anyone. But, where the rhythm of that walking starts to help the stuff kind of get into your head. And you're probably going to need more exercise just in general than other people. So taking breaks and things like that, maybe shorter study sessions every hour, you take a 10-minute walk around the block, that kind of thing, so that you really stay fresh.
Yeah.
Even something as simple as a stress ball, because you can squeeze that while you're studying, and that physical act can be soothing to you and also can help your brain concentrate. Or like a standing desk, or I would sometimes study not on a treadmill because I felt like that was going to be a little stressful, but on, was it like the recumbent bike?
Oh, yeah.
You're just kind of sitting there pedaling,
yeah.
and like you can't fall off or anything.
Yeah. Ellipticals too. I find ellipticals a little bit easier because,
True.
I don't know, it doesn't take as much coordination because your feet don't really move.
Yeah, so you're getting some exercise. It might be good for your brain to like focus on this, and also you're studying.
Yeah. I think that makes a lot of sense. And again, you should, think to yourself about what physical activities can lend themselves to this. Some people even find using hand gestures might be enough physical activity to help associate material with your body so you can memorize it. Even people like use your finger to write out information in the air. May look a little strange to some folks, but if you pass the bar, nobody cares what you look like while you study it for it.
Right, exactly. And I think, you're probably going to have better luck if you're trying to memorize, say, the series of hearsay exceptions and the elements. You're probably not going to want to just type those out again and again. You're probably going to have a lot more effectiveness if you physically write them with a pen on a piece of paper, just because that act of writing is going to get them into your head so much faster than typing, which isn't really physical. Of course you're typing, but it's like a different brain process, I feel like.
Yeah, there's a lot of research out there about how we really passively type things, that it doesn't engage our brain in the same way that writing does. That's why, in our law school work, we are such big advocates for getting back to handwriting your notes, because we have yet to find some studies that are like, you should definitely type your notes. You're going to retain more information that way. There's basically
honestly don't. I've never seen that study.
I've never seen that study. And the other thing is that most of us have had the experience of like quickly sending a text or sending an email and then having no recollection of doing it, because that's how passive we are with a lot of our devices. And so,
oh yeah, you can send an email and then 5 seconds later, it's like, wait, what was that about?
Right.
Or I had a weird one the other day where I spent literally, 30 minutes reading this really long article from the New York Times Magazine or something on my phone before I went to sleep. And then someone asked me why I was up so late. And I told them, I was reading this article. And they asked me what it was about. And I literally had no idea.
And you spent 30 minutes reading it.
I spent 30 minutes, between like 1 and 1:30. It was so important to me. And even now, I actually cannot remember what the article was about. So be careful about thinking things are going into your head when they're not.
Yes. So constantly be evaluating whether or not the activities you're doing are creating, memories for you to recall when you do the practice.
It's super weird when things like that happen.
It is. The brain is an amazing thing. It really is.
Yeah. Another one to watch out for is if you're taking Ambien a lot, which I was taking in law school, I would be physically reading a physical book, and I would have absolutely no recollection of it the next day.
Oh, like before bed?
Yeah. Oh. I would remember like, I read this. I read 10 pages. But the next day, I had absolutely no idea what was in those 10 pages.
Huh. That is really weird.
It's a known side effect of Ambien, actually. Huh. But kind of weird.
Yeah.
Might want to think about that if you're studying for the bar.
Yeah.
Studying late at night, maybe not going to help if you're planning on taking Ambien.
Well, I think for most of us, even if you're not taking Ambien, studying late at night oftentimes means that you can't recollect what you're doing. I think a lot of people are like, yeah, I put in that extra hour between 11 and 12. And I'm like, really? What did you retain from that?
For me, that's when I study best.
I know, but you're a night owl.
I know I'm a night owl, but I think the point is, at some point, it doesn't matter at what point that is, at some point in the number of hours you're studying per day, that you're not really effectively retaining information. So you should probably be doing something else.
Well, and I think that's the thing. If you're a night owl like you are, it's not like you're not on your 16th hour of study between like 11 and 12.
I'm on hour like number 4.
Right, exactly. So I think, though, a lot of people say, oh, well, I studied late at night, but they started studying at 9 or 10 in the morning, and then you're on, 10 or 12 hours, and then like the extra hours at the night are just, burning you out, or you were up working out at 6 in the morning, and so you're only sleeping 6 hours. Like, that's a terrible idea.
Not a good idea.
Not a good idea.
Not a good idea. And actually, I think people who think they're not so much kinesthetic learners can use some of these techniques that we're going to talk about to break up the study and make it more interesting and make it less of a tedious slog that's going to burn you out.
That's true. Because studying for the bar is boring. It really is.
It's really boring. And, the things that worked for you before, they probably still work, but not necessarily at this volume.
Right.
It's day after day after day for weeks of doing this stuff, and you are going to get bored.
Yeah. I think that is really true.
I think switching it up with some of these techniques, for example, like channeling your inner actor.
Yeah.
This is something that really works for people who are kinesthetic learners, but it can work for anyone. Mm-hmm. Make an elaborate stage and stage tapping. I don't care. Put on an outfit, put on a crown and teach someone.
Yeah.
Act out, a scene from a hearsay exception or something. I mean, these are all, like, the law is about people.
Right, stories.
So, yeah, it's stories, basically. So, if you're finding yourself just, like, slogging through this material and you're on hour 8 of day 42 and you're just like, I am going crazy, then you could use something different.
Yeah, that's very true. I wonder if it would count studying while getting, like, a pedicure or a foot massage.
That could be a good idea. You could try it out.
I used to do my reading for my criminal law class, like, in bulk. And that was one of my favorite things to do, was to go to get a, like, pedicure and read, like, criminal law cases, which might sound really weird, but it's a very pleasant way to spend, like, a Friday afternoon.
I mean, it sounds relaxing. I would oftentimes take like case books or outlines or whatever to the gym, just because I was like, well, I'm going anyway, so at least I can do something.
Yeah. I also think that mnemonics or songs can be useful to you as you study. I know we've talked about this with other learning styles as well, but especially like if you're like humming something to yourself, you're like engaging your body a little bit more, you might find that that's an easy way to retain information. We've talked a little bit about using your hands, but when studying alone, you can talk with your hands while learning. You can, explain things using your hands to an empty chair, a significant other, a friend, or even a pet. Although, when one of our tutors was researching different options about how to study for different learning styles, she found an article that talked about that cats are not as good of listeners because when you
I can see that.
They will only listen as long as you use a voice that suggests you are showering them with compliments, whereas dogs listen very attentively and look at you as though you are brilliant. So I guess maybe dogs are better to study with. I'm not sure. I didn't have my
dog
cats.
is a better study buddy.
I know. I didn't have my cats when I was studying for the bar, so I didn't try that one out.
This is a good. If you don't have a dog, maybe you can borrow one from your friend. You can take the dog on a walk, then when you stop, you can lecture the dog about what you're learning.
Yeah, or maybe your school has therapy pets coming by. You could have a conversation with the dog. Or
a llama if you're at Berkeley.
Huh?
If you're at Berkeley, they have llamas.
Oh, they have llamas?
Yeah, they have llamas for like probably not for the bar exam, but for the exam week.
So do you pet the llama?
Yeah, you can go like hug the llama. They're very friendly. I mean, imagine, you're like full body contact with the llama and they're like licking your head.
They're pretty tall.
I can see it being stress reducing.
Yeah, that's a lot of animal. I was just at a little farm this weekend and there weren't any llamas, but I was trying to like imagine like hugging a goat and I was like, I don't think it's going to do anything for me.
Yeah. I mean, I've seen llamas. They're nice. I liked them.
Yeah. I mean, they're kind of mellow. They spit, I think. Isn't that one of the things
they do?
Yeah. So, hey, talk to your school. You never know what kind of animals might show up.
Yeah. I mean, some places you can even check them out of the library, I think, at certain times of year.
Yeah. Or, check out a llama?
I think those are dogs.
Okay.
I think maybe it's Yale, like Yale Law School. You can check out a dog if you need one.
Because I was just trying to imagine somebody like checking out a llama and like walking.
No, I don't think I don't think they let you take the llamas home.
I don't know what I do with a llama for like an hour.
No, I remember like in kindergarten, we got to take the guinea pig home for the weekend. And that was really exciting, but that's a little easier than a llama.
Yeah, that's true. Or hey, now there are like cat cafes where you can go hang out with animals.
Totally.
Yeah.
In fact, a law firm partner that I used to work for has one.
Has a cat cafe.
Yep.
This podcast is just getting stranger and stranger.
People are like, "Where is this going?" Sorry, a little off topic. But animals, great for you. You're petting your cat. You're trying to mimic something.
Yeah, I think my cats just fall asleep. They're like, "Thanks for talking to me, but we're going to bed." Another thing that a lot of people do in law school that you can use for the bar exam is making flashcards. If that's something that works for you. I think my flashcard warning to everyone is don't spend too much time making flashcards unless they work for you. So the physical act of writing out cards and flipping them over definitely engages.
Well, and people may also want to look at the critical pass flashcards, which are basically already made for you. So if you do find flashcards to be really effective because you can take them with you, you can do things with them, it's worth looking at.
Yeah. The one thing I will say that I have found students can do effectively with flashcards is, maybe you don't make them for all of the law because that can be completely overwhelming. But let's say when you're doing MBE practice, you just make flashcards for the MBE practice questions that you miss. So the rules that you miss. And then as you drill them and become comfortable with certain rules, you take them out of the stack. So there's like a lot of engagement with the flashcards. I can see that. I've seen that work really well, but flashcards for a lot of people can just be a huge, huge time suck.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those busy work things where you feel like you're doing a lot of work, but really are you getting that much out of it? That's why I think maybe some pre-made ones could be a decent option, or using something like Post-it notes where you can move them around on the wall and kind of see how they relate to each other. You just want to make sure that this is actually helping you. And again, it goes back to what you're trying to memorize. I think flashcards can be great for memorizing things, but they're not necessarily that great for trying to understand a topic.
True.
So, you've got to already understand the concepts and just be trying to literally memorize, these are the elements of, homicide or whatever it is.
Right.
So you've got to think about how to use different tools for different things.
Yeah, exactly. And you have to evaluate, again, which courses or which subjects lend themselves to these certain types of study tools. So flashcards might be really effective, let's say, for evidence, where you've got to memorize a lot of hearsay exceptions.
Or like the number of a rule or something.
Right. Or, all of the rules about, in civil procedure or something like that. But then maybe you move over to torts and you're like, torts doesn't really work for me in flashcards because it's much more about longer attack plans, so you come up with a different way to study that.
Yeah, and I think, too, if you're looking for something that can help you more with a comprehension of a subject, I think one of the tools that we sometimes refer people to is sketchy law, which really does these three-dimensional, essentially like little plays for you.
Yeah.
And so, if you're struggling to comprehend a topic, I think something like that's going to help you a lot more than just reading flashcards.
Yeah, I think that's true. So again, I think the overall theme that kind of has come out of all of our podcasts about learning styles is that you constantly have to be evaluating your bar prep. So you might even want to decide that, once a week or once every 3 days, you're going to sit down and kind of like audit yourself. What's going well, what doesn't. I've even had a lot of students keep journals at the end of the day, tracking what went well and setting their intentions for the next day. I mean, not like a whole, like, sit down to your diary type journal, but just a few.
Dear diary, today I studied 8.5 hours for the bar exam. It was very boring.
It was very boring, and I am getting more anxious by the minute. I think that...
But you can also track, are you doing exercise? Are you going to yoga? Are you, like, eating healthy foods? So that you can start to see trends that are developing in a negative way before they completely wreck your bar prep and end up with you, having a complete breakdown, which is really to be avoided.
Yeah. And I think that one of the things that can be very effective when you're kind of taking notes, quick notes about your day and tracking things, is to set some positive intentions for the next day. So even if, let's say you had a really bad day, like you didn't do everything that was on your to-do list, you didn't exercise, and you ate pizza. Because I mean, I love a good pizza. I even love gluten-free pizza, which is not even like real pizza, but still, I know it like horrifies you, but sometimes a gluten-free girl's got to do what I can do. There are consequences to the regular pizza, but so no judgment if you eat pizza, but I think you might make your list of and then you're like, I did not have a great day, but then you can finish out your day by saying, but here are the things I'm going to do tomorrow to recommit. So I'm going to go to yoga, or I'm going to go for a run. I'm going to do, these 10 things on my to-do list. I'm going, you can set these intentions. So at least when you finish the day, even if it was a crummy day, you have something actionable that you can start with the next morning. And I think that is very important.
Well, and also I think put them on your schedule. And so I think scheduling becomes even more important for the kinesthetic learners because they're going to need more breaks. So, if you schedule, you decide which yoga class you're going to and schedule around it, you're much more likely to go.
That's true.
Don't you have a book that has a lot of positive bar exam affirmations in it?
Yes, we do. The name of the book is blanking for me right now, but we will post to it in the show notes. We'll link to it in the show notes.
I mean, that might sound a little hoo-hoo to you, but look, this is a process that brings a lot of people to their knees. Yeah. And so you might have to do some kooky stuff to get through it. Yeah,
it's very true. And, I think that if you have some baggage coming into the bar, I mean, almost everybody has baggage, but baggage like you've struggled academically, maybe you've failed a bar exam before, maybe you've failed a bar exam multiple times. You have to be very aware that these feelings are going to bubble up and intensify the more you study. So if you, have had to lose a job because you didn't pass, even though you kind of may have made peace with that, you need to be very aware that that's probably going to bubble up during the bar time. And you need to have some way to cope with that because it's going to happen for almost anybody. Fear and then all of these feelings of doubt are very present.
Right. I think, there's no harm in getting your team together for this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So, maybe you want to talk to a therapist every week or two. Maybe you want to have a massage set up every couple of weeks for physical stress relief. Whatever it is, do what works. Maybe you need to find a tutor who can basically help you be, okay, you are doing what needs to be done or you're not doing what needs to be done. And to make sure that you're really practicing on what you're going to be graded on.
Right.
Which, is a problem for a lot of people who are studying for the bars. They focus so much on trying to learn all this material and don't really practice enough.
Yeah, that's so
and
true.
Don't get feedback.
Yeah, and don't get feedback on that practice either from themselves through thoughtful self-evaluation, your bar program, or a tutor, or some schools even allow you to access some feedback over the bar period. But feedback is super important, but make sure you're also getting feedback from somebody who's knowledgeable about the bar that you're taking. So I heard a story that somebody was working with a tutor that wasn't an expert in the jurisdiction they were taking. They were an expert in a different jurisdiction. And that's a terrible idea.
Yeah, I mean, we have a tool called the Brainy Bar Bank, which ranks the frequency of topics, subtopics, categories that are tested on the UBE bar exams and California, and those lists are totally different. So someone who's an expert in California and maybe could get you through that bar might not be able to get you through the New York bar. That's just kind of the way it is.
Right. And the bars, some of the questions are an hour, some of the questions are 30 minutes. Some have performance tests, some don't. The performance tests could be slightly different. I mean, there's a lot of nuances. So you want to make sure that whoever you're getting feedback from didn't just pass a bar, but they passed a bar that is going to be reflective of the bar that you're taking.
Right. Then you have some weird outliers like Florida or Louisiana. I mean, you need a specialist.
Yeah. Yeah, the Florida bar is really its own beast.
Yeah, and then Louisiana, civil law.
Yeah. Oof. I would not be helpful with that.
No, I would be like, I have literally no idea where to even start here, except I know someone who passed it, so I can put you in touch with them.
I know. I remember I've learned some about the Florida bar, and there was even a type of law that was tested. I didn't even know what that was. I'd never heard of it before. I think it was called homesteading or something like that. I was just...
Oh, yeah, there's like a Florida homestead exception. That's why so many rich people move there.
Yeah.
That's the full extent of what I know about that, by the way.
There you go. So we are not qualified to help you with the Florida bar, basically.
No. I mean, when I took Massachusetts, it wasn't the UBE, and you had to learn like commercial paper. It's like, what happens if you pass a bad check? You know, it was very weird stuff that shows up.
Yep. All right. Well, one other thing that we wanted to cover before we finish the podcast were just, some warnings and things to think about with, because you're a kinesthetic learner, you want to really watch out for distractions. So you want to keep your desk clear of distracting objects and sit in a location that offers the fewest distractions. We've talked about maybe utilizing like a stone or a stress ball, or you might have something that you can utilize and work into your studying that's going to help you, but you want to make sure that you're not just doing other activities that are going to be unhelpful.
Right.
Some bar programs are going to allow you to watch lectures live, although a lot of them, if you're doing a lecture program, are just going to be recorded in a room with other people. So, listening to lectures may not be the best use of your time, but maybe watch them on the treadmill or listen to them while you're taking a walk. There might be ways that you can incorporate some of that material into some physical movement that's going to make it easier to retain. But again, you need to evaluate how you're using your time and make sure that it's meaningful.
Right. And I think you have to critically evaluate which lectures you're going to watch and which lectures you're not.
Yeah.
If it's a topic area where you tallied the class, you probably don't need to watch Contracts 101. Like those 4 hours might be spent better at doing something else. But if it's an area that you've never learned before, say you're taking California and you've never studied community property, that might be a really good use of your time just to get an overview. So just don't feel like you have to kind of blindly stick to a program that may not be designed for the way that you're going to work most effectively.
Yep. You're going to be able to, again, nobody knows, like if you listen to all the lectures or just half the lectures or
doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter.
And honestly, the fact that you listen to all the lectures is not going to get you passing.
Nope. That nobody said, very seldom do people say, because I listened to all the lectures, I was totally prepared and was able to pass with no problems and no practice. That does not usually come up.
We talk to people all the time who are like, I don't understand how this happened. I did everything I was told to do. I did all the steps on the schedule. I watched every lecture and I failed.
Yeah, exactly. So one of the other things you need to make sure you're doing is that you're practicing. Practice. It's all over our website. It's something that's incredibly important. If you need someone to help you with that, make sure that you are looking into getting a tutor or using any resources your school might have to make sure that you're doing and evaluating that practice, because it's not just about doing the practice. It's about evaluating whether or not you're right or wrong. You also want to consider practicing in exam-like settings because, the exam-like setting may help to create a physical memory that is tied to the content. But you also want to make sure that anything physical that you're going to do in the exam room, you've practiced. So if you want to use earplugs, make sure that you practice with them because the physical sensations around that could be very distracting if you're not used to them. Mm-hmm. You might want to consider handwriting the exam because you like to use your hands so much, but I think that's typically a mistake because
I think that's almost always a bad idea.
Yeah, I mean the typed exam is
unless you actually can't type. I mean, maybe arguably then.
Yeah, but it's just going to be it's just much harder for the grader to read. So,
it's just harder to get things down. I mean, you can't write as much. So, I think you definitely should make a hand-drawn outline.
Yeah.
But then when it comes time to type the actual answer, you almost certainly want to type it.
Yeah, I agree. So I think that that's something you want to play with, like using some handwriting in your pre-essay planning, but not on the actual exam when you're typing out your answer. You might want to try studying with white noise if you're really distracted.
Although this one I feel like sometimes people get too dependent on.
Yeah.
And the reality is you're going to have to take this exam in what's probably a physically unpleasant environment. So you also have to get used to that.
Yeah. So this is a tough one. Again, you can't start getting dependent on these crutches because then when you take them away, it can be very disrupting. Another one that's not as much about things like white noise, but people who like to always have like a water bottle or something with you, in many jurisdictions, you cannot take water bottles or anything to drink into the exam room. Huh. And I always tell my students, like, you have to take the water. It's like weaning yourself off. You have to like,
you got to take it, got to
take it away.
Yeah. Or things like candy, gum. I mean, I would encourage people to know early what's allowed and then practice under those conditions.
Yeah. And because something like being used to taking a break to drink water, it can be very distracting to remove that. So you got to be conscious of the little habits that you're developing so you can make sure that they're not going to be prohibited in the exam room and then kind of knock you off your routine.
Yeah, for sure. And you can also plan that as part of your exam taking plan, day of planning. Okay, if I can't have my water bottle, but I know I'm going to get thirsty, when am I going to take a break to pop up and go to the restroom and have a sip of water?
Yep.
You want to plan that out so you're not thinking, oh my gosh, I'm so thirsty, instead of focusing on writing your exam.
Yeah, that's very true. You can get like obsessive thoughts about.
Yeah, it happens.
Mm-hmm. You talked a little bit about this earlier, Allison, about the importance of study breaks as a kinesthetic learner.
Yeah, I think this applies equally on exam day. Like, you're probably not going to be able to do the MBE in 1 3-hour sitting.
Right.
I mean, if you're one of those people who always has to get up on the aisle in the airplane like I am, I mean, I knew, like, I'm going to have to get up. But lots of people just won't, which I find amazing. Like, how can they sit there and focus for 3 straight hours without, like, moving?
Must be a really good TV show or book that they're reading. I don't know.
Well, or even in the exam. I'm like, oh. I mean, for me, like, I could tell that my brain would start after, the better part of an hour. I could feel I was kind of flagging.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a good use of a couple of minutes to get up, walk around, splash some water on my face, come back, have a sip of water. But you just want to, you want to plan that out, and you probably want to have practiced it too.
Yes. And I think especially for the exam session, like you were mentioning with the MBE, it's like if you can't sit and focus for 3 hours, which I think most people can't, then you need to decide when you're going to take a break and what kind of break. Is it just going to be to walk to the back of the room and back to your desk? Is it going to be to go to the bathroom? Because then you need to know that there are going to be a few minutes that are going to be used for that. And then you need to practice not having those minutes or practice.
Yeah, you've got to build that time.
Yeah, exactly. So that's really, really critically important as well. So it's important to experiment with what you need. But then you also have to be sure that you are comfortable with what you're going to do in the exam room and practice that, because I really don't like people changing things and getting creative in the exam room.
No, definitely not. And people sometimes do some weird stuff. Like, I remember we had one student who would like drink so much caffeine beforehand, she'd be throwing up. And we're just like, okay, this doesn't seem like a great idea. But if you insist on doing it, like, I mean, she passed eventually, but it was just like, what? Like, So, yeah, plan ahead.
Other things to think about if you do try and study with a study buddy or in a group, make sure that you are getting a return on your investment. We always talk about this when studying with other people. You may want to try and lead the discussion to make sure that your focus isn't wandering, because you likely need to be using your hands and engaging and not just passively listening, or you're not going to retain any information. All right. Other things to avoid. Often kinesthetic learners don't like cramped spaces, so try not to study in tiny, tiny spaces. Really watch the internet. Like, we all need to watch the internet. If it is a distraction, disable it, go to a coffee shop or someplace that doesn't have Wi-Fi that you can access. Make sure that you're setting yourself up so you're not going to be on websites or checking email or doing things that are going to be distracting. And don't do these marathon study sessions without taking breaks. No
I think people just get this idea that like they have to do this for hours and hours and hours at a time, and that that's just not true. If you can take a 5-minute, 10-minute break every hour, and you're 80% more effective when you come back, that's a good trade-off.
Yep, exactly. All right. Well, I think with that, we are unfortunately out of time. I want to take Huh?
I said, oh no.
Oh no. Oh no. We could go back to talking about llamas again.
Sorry, people.
I want to take a second to remind you to check out our blog at barexamtoolbox.com, which is full of helpful tips to help you prepare and stay sane as you study for the bar exam. You can also find information on our website about our courses, tools, and one-on-one tutoring programs to support you as you study for the UBE or California bar exams. If you enjoyed this episode of the Bar Exam Toolbox Podcast, please take a second to leave a review and rating on your favorite listening app. We'd really appreciate it. And be sure to subscribe so you don't miss anything. If you are still in law school, you might also like to check out our popular Law School Toolbox podcast as well. If you have any questions or comments, please don't hesitate to reach out to myself or Allison at lee@barexamtoolbox.com or allison@barexamtoolbox.com, or you can always contact us via our website contact form at barexamtoolbox.com. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk soon.